Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Yeah.
You know how much we love to really get into a subject, and today is no exception. We're diving deep into Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. Now, I know a lot of you have probably heard of this book. Maybe you've even read it, but we're going to kind of go past just the surface level. We're going to unpack some of Gilbert's ideas, and even more important than that, figure out how you can actually put these concepts into practice in your own lives.
Well, I think that's what's so cool about Big Magic is that it really does resonate with so many people. She has a really engaging writing style. It's personal and insightful. But I think the core of it, she just gives you permission to embrace your creativity. It doesn't matter what your experience is or your background.
Yeah, totally. Right from the beginning, she has this great story about the poet Jack Gilbert, who's not related to Elizabeth Gilbert, by the way. But he gives this advice to a younger student.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about bringing forth these hidden treasures.
Mm-hmm.
And it really sets the tone for the whole book,
Mm-hmm.
that we all have this potential just waiting to be uncovered.
Yeah, and that's such a great point to connect back with your own life. What are those hidden treasures for you? What sparks of creativity have you maybe been ignoring or even pushing down?
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day,
Mhm.
work, family, all the responsibilities, and just kind of forget about those things. I've definitely been there.
Absolutely. And Gilbert's really honest about that in her own life. She talks about her own experiences, trying to fit in her writing with all these different jobs that she had and how she kind of came to this realization that a creative life doesn't have to look any specific way.
Just have to be like the starving artist in the garret, waiting for this burst of inspiration.
Exactly. She really emphasizes that creativity. It can be part of your everyday life. It's just a way of approaching things with a sense of curiosity and play. And I think that's really freeing for people who maybe feel like they don't fit that image of what an artist is supposed to be.
So how do we get to that point? How do we tap into that everyday creativity? I mean, she talks about fear being a big obstacle.
Yeah.
And that really resonates with me because I'll have this idea and I'm super excited about it. But then these doubts start to creep in. Like, what if it's not good enough? What if people hate it?
Oh, totally. That is so common. And Gilbert actually lists out a bunch of these fears that people have about creativity. She says, I'm not talented enough. I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have the time. She just goes on and on. It's really like she's reading our minds. But the important thing is she doesn't tell us to ignore those fears.
So how do we deal with them? Do we just power through?
It's more about just acknowledging that they're there.
Yeah.
Accepting that it's part of the process and creating anyway. She even says that fear is kind of boring. It's the same old song and dance. The real magic comes when we can move past that and start to create.
So we're facing our fears. We're ready to create. But then there's this whole other thing about inspiration. How do we find it? Do we just wait for it to strike?
Gilbert has this really interesting perspective on inspiration. She believes that ideas are actually living things, like they have their own energy and their own kind of agency.
Wait, so you're saying ideas aren't just something that we come up with. It's more like they come to us.
Kind of, yeah, like they're visitors.
Yeah.
And she tells this fascinating story about this novel she was working on that was set in the Amazon. But, life got in the way. She got sidetracked. And eventually the inspiration for that book just kind of vanished.
Oh, yeah. That's happened to me, too. You get all excited about this project, and then something happens, and the spark just goes away.
Mm.
So what happened to her Amazon book? Did she ever go back to it?
She didn't. But here's the really wild part. Around the same time, she met another author, Anne Patchett. And guess what? Anne Patchett ended up writing a novel set in the Amazon. And so Gilbert sees this as evidence that ideas kind of have a life of their own. And sometimes they find a different way to be born.
Whoa, that's kind of freaky.
It is.
It is. But it also makes you wonder, what if we miss our chance with an idea? What if it just floats off and finds someone else?
That's where this idea of creative contract comes in, which is something Gilbert talks about. She believes that ideas are going to come and go, and that we need to be open to them, ready to work when inspiration strikes. But also recognizing that we can't force it. It's more of a collaboration.
Okay, so how do we become more receptive
Oh,
to all these ideas that are floating around out there?
that's where curiosity comes in. And that's something we can actually cultivate, like a muscle that we can strengthen, Like you can actually practice being curious.
So like, how would that work?
Well, Gilbert talks about following these little threads of interest, even if they seem random at first, or maybe not that important.
So like, let's say I'm scrolling through social media and I see this really cool picture, like a botanical illustration, maybe from the 1800s, instead of just, liking it and scrolling on. I should stop and think about, why did that catch my eye?
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe you do a little research. You know about botanical illustration or about that time period, or maybe about that specific plant in the picture. You just never know where that first little spark of curiosity could take you.
It's almost like a scavenger hunt or something. You're just following these clues, and you don't know where they're going to lead.
That's a great way to put it. And a lot of times it's those unexpected turns that lead to the best discoveries. So it's about trusting that the process will take you where you need to go.
Okay, I'm with you on the curiosity thing. But what about those times when you're really into something? You're ready to put in the work, but then you just hit a wall. What about creative blocks?
Well, Gilbert talks about this too. She believes that creativity wants to work with us, but that we also have to kind of set the stage.
So it's not just about waiting for the inspiration to hit us. We have to actually make space for it in our lives.
Exactly. And that means making some practical changes, but also some mindset shifts too. For example, she talks about creating rituals and routines that signal to your brain, okay, it's time to be creative now.
So that could be something like having a special place where you write, or always writing in the same coffee shop.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe it's setting aside a specific time every day to work on your creative projects, even if it's just for a few minutes. The point is to be consistent, to create a space for your creativity to flow.
Okay, I get that. But what about the mindset part? How do we actually change the way we think?
One of the most important things Gilbert talks about is claiming your right to be creative. She calls it entitlement.
Entitlement? Doesn't that sound kind of
Well,
negative?
I know, right? But she's using it in a positive way. What she means is we all have this ability to create, whether or not we're good at it or whether anyone else thinks it's good.
So we need to shut down that inner critic that's always telling us
Right.
we're not talented enough,
Right?
or that we're not worthy.
It's about saying, I am a writer, or I am an artist, or whatever it is you want to create, even if you're just starting out. It's about owning that part of yourself.
I love that. It's like a declaration of creative independence.
Exactly. And it can be really powerful. She even suggests saying those words out loud, like you're making a commitment to your own creativity.
Yeah, I've heard other people talk about that too.
Yeah.
About showing up for your creative practice, even when you don't feel like it.
Yeah, it's like anything else. The more you do it, the stronger you get. And Gilbert talks about how important persistence is, not in a way that's like grinding or exhausting, but in a way that honors your own creative rhythms.
She mentions her mom's philosophy,
Yeah.
which is done is better than good.
Yes. That's so true. Because so often we get stuck trying to make things perfect, and it can actually paralyze us.
Oh yeah, I totally do that. I'll spend hours and hours trying to get something just right, and then half the time I never even end up showing it to anyone.
I think Gilbert's point is finishing something is more important than trying to make it perfect, because it's in the process of finishing that we actually learn and grow and create momentum for future projects.
It's like that saying, perfect is the enemy of good. But that fear of not being good enough is so hard to overcome. You know, it's one thing to say done is better than good, but it's another thing to actually believe it
Totally.
and to let go of that need for validation from other people.
Well, Gilbert has some interesting thoughts about that too. She talks about how important it is to detach from the outcome.
Meaning not getting so caught up in whether or not something is successful.
Right. She says we should focus more on the joy of the process itself, like creating something just for the pleasure of it.
But that's easier said than done. I mean, especially these days, when everything is about likes and shares and followers.
I know it's hard. But she reminds us that real creativity comes from a place of inner satisfaction.
Not from what other people think.
Exactly.
And that even if our work never finds a huge audience, it still has value.
It does. It has value because it's an expression of you, of your unique voice and perspective. And it has value because it brings you joy.
And sometimes the best creative work is the stuff we make just for ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Those hidden treasures
Yeah.
that we might never share with anyone.
Right. Gilbert even says that our work can matter enormously and not matter at all, and that both of those things can be true.
That's deep. It also makes me think about the reality of trying to be a creative person. I mean, how do you balance that with having a job and a family?
Yeah. It's a challenge for sure. And Gilbert talks about that a lot in the book, about her own struggles, trying to make time for her writing while also working all these different jobs. And what she realized is that having a day job doesn't have to be a bad thing.
So it's not like an either-or situation. You can have a normal job and still be a creative person.
Exactly. And sometimes having a job that's separate from your art can actually give you more freedom.
Oh, because you're not relying on it to make money.
Right. It takes some of the pressure off, and you can just create for the pure joy of it.
It's like protecting your creativity
Mm,
from the
it is.
demands of the market.
I like that, protecting your creativity.
You know, a lot of people talk about following your passion. But what if you have lots of passions?
Mm.
Or what if your passion doesn't fit neatly into some kind of career?
Well, Gilbert addresses that too. She says we should be open to all sorts of different ways to express ourselves and not get too hung up on traditional ideas of success.
She talks about this time when she was feeling lost, didn't know what she was supposed to be doing.
Oh, yeah.
And her friend, the novelist Ann Patchett, gave her some pretty blunt advice.
What did she say?
Basically, stop whining and do the work.
Uh-huh. I love that. Sometimes that's exactly what we need to hear.
Right. And it goes back to what we were saying before about how it's more important to finish something than to try to make it perfect.
Yeah, done is better than good.
Okay, so we've talked about finding inspiration and facing our fears.
Yeah.
And how to create a life that supports our creative work.
Yeah.
But what about the actual process of creating something? How do we get into that flow state where the ideas just seem to come effortlessly?
Gilbert has this really cool concept that she calls trickster energy, and it's all about approaching creativity with a sense of playfulness and trust.
Trickster energy. I like that.
Yeah. She thinks that sometimes we get too serious about ourselves and our work, and that can actually block our creativity.
So we need to loosen up a little.
Yeah, have more fun.
Have more fun.
And she even suggests that there might be forces outside of ourselves that are helping us create.
Like spirit guides or something.
She doesn't actually use that term, but she's definitely open to the idea that there might be these unseen collaborators working with us.
Okay, that's getting a little woo-woo for me, but I'm willing to keep an open mind. So how do we tap into this trickster energy?
By being more playful, don't be afraid to experiment, make mistakes, embrace the absurd.
It sounds like it's about letting go of control.
Yeah, trusting the process, trusting your instincts.
But what about when things don't go our way? What about rejection and setbacks?
It's true, the creative path isn't always easy, but Gilbert says those challenges are all part of what makes it worthwhile.
So it's about finding joy in the journey,
Exactly.
even when things are tough.
And it's about trusting that even if our work doesn't become some big success, it still has value.
It's like we're creating these beautiful treasures
Yeah.
for ourselves to discover.
And that's more than enough. You know, one of the things I really appreciate about Gilbert's approach is that she's all about being kind to yourself.
Self-compassion is so important.
It is, and we often forget that when we're striving to create something great. But she reminds us that we're all works in progress, and it's okay to mess up and not have all the answers.
And sometimes those imperfections are what make our work so unique and interesting.
Absolutely. It's all about embracing the whole journey, the good, the bad, and the messy, and trusting that it's all leading you somewhere amazing.
It's encouraging to hear that it's okay to be imperfect.
Mm.
You know, I think so many of us get caught up in comparing ourselves to what other people are doing, and we start feeling like we'll never be good enough.
Yeah, it's like the downside of social media. You're always seeing this curated perfection, and it makes it hard to appreciate your own path.
Right.
But Gilbert makes this great point that comparing yourself to someone else is like comparing apples and oranges. Everyone's got their own journey.
So what did you think about her idea of personal entitlement?
I think it's all about changing your perspective. Like, instead of thinking, there's not enough space for me, or I'm not good enough, you realize there's so much creative energy out there. And we can all tap into it.
We all have the right to create.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if we've achieved some level of success.
And that's where her advice about using powerful language comes in.
Oh, yeah.
Like, instead of saying, I'm trying to be a writer, you say, I am a writer.
Like you're making a statement.
You are. It's about owning your creativity.
So we've talked about finding inspiration and facing our fears, and even how to build a life that supports your creative work. But what about actually putting your work out there?
That's the scary part.
It is scary.
But Gilbert says it's a really important step.
She talks about how our creations want to be seen and heard.
Right. It's like they have a life of their own, and they're pushing us to share them.
It makes you think about that idea of ideas having their own agency.
It does.
So it's not just about us.
No.
It's about the creative impulse itself.
And trusting that it will lead us in the right direction.
But what about rejection? I think everyone's afraid of that.
Of course.
What if you put your heart and soul into something and people just don't care?
Well, Gilbert says rejection is just part of the game.
It's not a reflection on you.
No, not at all.
She says not everyone is going to love your work, and that's okay.
Yeah, she says you have to detach yourself from the outcome.
Meaning, don't get too hung up on whether people like it or not.
Right.
And that rejection can even be a good thing. How is that
Yeah,
possible?
because it can help you grow,
Yeah.
make your work stronger and find your
It's
audience.
like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah. Or maybe in this case, what doesn't kill you makes you more interesting.
I like that.
It's all part of the journey.
So the big takeaway from Big Magic
Hmm.
is that creativity isn't just for special people.
Right?
It's for everyone.
It is.
It doesn't matter how old you are or what your background is.
We all have the potential to create, to bring something beautiful into the world.
And it's not about becoming famous.
No.
It's about expressing yourself.
It's about the joy of creating
I love that.
and trusting that the universe wants you to create.
So to wrap up our deep dives into Big Magic, I think the message is pretty clear.
What is it?
Embrace your curiosity, face your fears, and create the life you want.
A life filled with creativity and joy.
What small creative act will you do today? What hidden treasure will you uncover? Let us know. Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying. Thanks for joining us.